Hey there, this is JG talking about Raid Shadow Legends. And, I kicked this channel off with a video series that I was calling Free Raid Ideas. And the idea there was to provide some ideas for content that could enrich Raid and really make it a more fun game. And today, I thought I would make sort of a prequel to all of that, which discusses what's wrong with Raid today. What are the things that I think are the core problems that it has that makes it not as fun as it could be? Now, I have to admit, I play Raid every day. It has, I think, millions of players. It's one of the top grossing apps that's out there. So they're clearly not doing too bad. Maybe it's a little presumptive of me to be talking about what's wrong with it. But I do see a lot of animosity from the player base. People saying, Raid's just out there to make money from it, which, they are a game company. They do need to make money from it. But players are frequently saying that they think Plarium is out of touch, doesn't really get the player base, doesn't really get what makes Raid fun. And every once in a while you have sort of content creators like rage quitting or just deciding they're done with the game. And for myself, honestly, I've been playing it less than a year. In the very first week that I was playing Raid, I saw some aspects of it that I was like, yeah, this could be the thing that eventually makes me quit this game. I would love for the game to stay fun. I would love for it to get better over time. There's never been any game that I've played forever. There's likely to be a point where I quit this game. But I think with some attention to some of the challenges that the game has today, it could have a lot more staying power, keep me in the game, probably keep a lot of other people in the game over time. And so I just want to talk about what I think are some of the big flaws in the game, the things that make me reconsider whether I want to play the game and how long I want to play the game, and a little bit about how those could be addressed. So I think really the challenges with Raid boil down to three fundamental problems. The first one is that the time commitment is too high. You have to play a lot to play this game. And the second one is that there's poor balance between the game and the metagame aspects. And the third one is that there's low content variability. And I'll dive into all those and explain them in a little more detail. So first of all, regarding the high time commitment, every day you get up to 920 free energy if you do all your dailies, 39 arena tokens, 20 tag arena tokens, 4 clan boss keys, 6 Iron Twins keys, 36 faction war keys, 10 gold keys, and 15 silver keys in Doom Tower. And using all those free resources takes a pretty good amount of time. I put together this chart here, assuming that you're running these all pretty fast. This is, maybe not the fastest that some of these can go, but certainly not on the slow end either. And, with these assumptions, I came up with 3.5 hours total game time every day to use all those resources. Now, I don't use all the resources, particularly the arena resources. I'm poking through and figuring out what teams I want to fight. I can't always find them. I do try to use my keys pretty much every day. Clan boss in particular, and grind the Doom Tower bosses for forge materials. And I use not the maximum amount of energy because I end up, it fills up overnight. Because I don't run an auto clicker, playing things overnight. But so it's something like 3.5 hours. And note that this is just time spent inside of battle. So not the time that you spend, in tavern, upgrading things that you've ground up to a high level in campaign. Not the time you spend sifting through the artifacts you got and selling them. Not the time in arena you spend picking which teams you want to fight. This is just inside the battles itself is something like 3.5 hours per day, and I'd say that's on the low side if you're trying to use something close to all of your resources. My dungeon runs are not 2 minutes on average. I think I can do Spider that fast, and that's about it. So, if I'm grinding any other kind of content, it's going to be more than that. So overall, this is a pretty substantial amount of time commitment for a game. Now, the silver lining here is that it's not all completely active game time. Actually, a lot of that is spent inside of auto battle, where you might just set up, multi-battle or auto battle, and then just set your phone down, step away from your computer, and let it run. Which gets us a little bit into the next section here. So the game versus the metagame. And what I'm defining as the game is, the actual combat, going through dungeons or raids, and then things like scoring points for events and tournaments. That's sort of the what I think of as the core game. And the metagame is all stuff, all the decisions that you make trying to decide how you're going to approach that game. So that's things like building teams, trying to figure out who you should throw into your Ice Golem or your Fire Knight team, deciding who to level, who to rank up, who to use books on, when you should pull your shards, what gear you should be farming, what gear you should be equipping, what you should be leveling up. Actually, a lot of that time spent on YouTube and in other content platforms, in Discord, talking to other people, trying to get advice, and all the planning that you do. I don't know about you. When I enjoy a game, I end up making a lot of spreadsheets about it. So I've got a bunch of spreadsheets for Raid to help me just keep track of various details of the game. Who I want to be ranking up next. My priority list of where I'd put my legendary books if I had a lot more of them, and other details like that. That's the metagame, and a good amount of that is actually spent completely outside the game. That's the part of the game that you play inside your head, even when you're not at the game, trying to decide, how you will approach the game when you get back into it. The metagame in Raid, I would say, is great. I think they've developed a really diverse set of bosses across, your dungeons and Doom Tower, and you need different champions in different places, and so there's someone that might be really great in Fire Knight and really terrible in Scarab, and things like that. And so, this is why I play the game. I think theory crafting, how to make a better team in each of these pieces of content, figuring out how to beat it for the first time, how to beat it at a higher difficulty level. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot to do there. They've developed some nice content, and it shows. And there's a nice set of champions, a really diverse set across all the rarities that really give you reasons to think hard about when to spend your shards, who to use in your team, who to level up, all of that. On the other end of the spectrum, though, the actual game is pretty terrible. It's the actual process of fighting in this game is tremendously boring, and the game really encourages you to grind a lot, but the grind is awful. And to really summarize that all in 2 words is auto battle. Auto battle, I think, reveals a lot of the challenges that this game has. I don't think they should take auto battle away. That would cause a riot among people. But the fact is, there aren't a lot of decisions to be made inside of battle, and so auto battle can do the job just about as well as anyone else can. When you're inside a battle, the only decision you can make for any one of your champions on their turn is who to target and what are their skills to use. A1, A2, A3. If it's an AoE skill, you can even choose who to use it on. It just hits everyone. So I'd say, a typical turn, you might have maybe 7 different choices you can make for your champion. And that's pretty low. If you think about game AI theory, a lot of times the complexity of a game is measured by how many decisions you can make at any one point in time. In something like tic-tac-toe, there's a maximum of 9 decisions you can make on any given turn. It's a very low complexity game. Something like chess, there'll be a few dozen possibilities. Go is one of the ones that has been hardest for AI for a long time, and there's hundreds of possible moves at any point. So Raid, I'd say 7 to 10 choices at any given point in time, which means in terms of AI sophistication, it's about up there with tic-tac-toe. And so if you think about it this way, if you compare what auto battle does versus what a highly skilled player would do in the same situation, you compared them. In most content, I would say auto battle is going to have the same success rate in the content, and it's going to be vastly faster at it than an expert. So, it's good that we have auto battle. Having to do it by hand would be really painful, would make that 3.5 hours especially painful to do. It would make it take 7 hours and be completely mindless. All you're doing is just, clicking, use your skills as fast as possible. So the challenge I think this creates is that the game part being boring means that the place in the game where you spend most of your time is actually not the fun part of the game. The metagame is the entertaining part, but the game does a lot of things to encourage you to spend time on the parts of the game that aren't fun. And just as an example, looking at events and tournaments. In tournaments, there's really no room for you to exercise skill in a tournament. The top place in the tournament has nothing to do with who is the best at playing the game. Tournaments are entirely about resources spent. How much energy are you willing to spend? How much time are you willing to spend running Dragon over and over? The only mechanic they have in any of the events and tournaments today is just take a piece of content and do that a bunch. Level up a bunch of people, run Dragon a bunch, run Fire Knight a bunch. spend a lot of time in arena. And so it just encourages you to spend more time using the existing teams you've built, in the same content over and over, but not actually encouraging you to spend more time in that metagame, crafting new teams, developing new strategies, and sort of having fun engaging with the content in an interesting and novel way. The third big problem, I think, is content variability. Every dungeon is the same every time. If you go to Ice Golem 25, it's the same affinity every time. The waves are the exact same champions every time, using the exact same skills with the exact same stats. So there's a little bit of RNG in there in terms of when do some of your masteries or skills actually place their debuffs, a little bit of variability in damage or when you crit. But more or less, once you've beaten the content once, you can beat it infinitely. That if you have a team that can beat the content fairly reliably and on an acceptable amount of time, you're basically done with that content. You don't need to rebuild that team. You can run that team through the content over and over again, but the challenge of that dungeon has stopped for you. And so the actual time you spent in the meta strategy for the dungeon is kind of brief. You spend a little bit of time theorizing, okay, I think it's time to push my team from level 20 to level 25 of this dungeon. You spend a little time rebuilding it, and then once you get there, you're done. There's really not a reason for you to reopen that content and play it again. You can run the team through it again, but you don't really engage with it and think about it anymore. Essentially, what you do in this game is you build a team for a piece of content once, and then you run it through the same content 1,000 times. Building the team is the part that's really fun, but all of the game's incentives are aligned around having you spend time in the unfun part of the game, grinding that content endlessly. There's also a challenge for Plarium here, which is, they can't design new dungeons as quickly as players are able to conquer those dungeons and get bored with them. And so Iron Twins is the example of the newest piece of content that's less than 2 weeks old right now. Already I've come up with an unkillable team that can get me to the maximum level, and that I just run on auto battle through the whole thing. It sounds like they're going to change the mechanics soon. I'm going to need to rebuild that. I already know what team I'm building next, so that I can continue to run it at the highest level. This was an enormous undertaking. You can tell the Iron Twin system is something they needed 6 months or more to develop. And 2 weeks in, I'm more or less finished with the content. I have the teams that I want and the teams that I'll be running dozens of times through the dungeon, but I'm not really continuing to engage with that content at a significant level. So there's this real challenge of a treadmill that Plarium has, where to keep players engaged and enjoying the metagame, they need to be able to generate new content. But generating new content is hard, and in general, the players are quicker than the developers are at getting through that content, and to the point that it stops being engaging for them. So that's sort of the summary of what I think are the challenges that Raid faces today. And now I'd like to talk about solutions. I won't get into a lot of details because this whole video series is aimed on well-thought-out specific solutions of things that Plarium could add to the game that I think would really address these issues and develop some great content. But let's talk about, in broad strokes, what are solutions to these problems going to look like? So regarding time commitment, one of the big things you need to focus on is reducing the time commitment of older content as you release newer content. So, for instance, with the Iron Twins, I've seen a number of people complaining that the Iron Twins take both Iron Twin keys and energy, and wondering why it's not just keys. Personally, I think that was a good decision, because since it consumes some of your energy, then it's not just a strict add to your to-do list, where in addition to the 3.5 hours that we already had in the game, you have to add another hour of running Iron Twins every day. Since it consumes some of your energy, it reduces some of your time in other content, and sort of lets you reclaim that for the Iron Twins. I think especially for the content that over time is seen to be less engaging and less good content in the game, you want players spending less time on it. You don't want players spending time grinding things that they're not having fun on. And so Plarium can get clever about ways of reclaiming that so that there's less time spent there and more time available for the content that players are having more fun with. I think a good example of this are super raids, where you can do twice the resources, twice the rewards, and basically run twice as many dungeons in half the time. That's really good. I'm glad they have them open all the time in Faction Wars and Doom Tower. That certainly speeds up the grind there. They seem to be a little withholding on it for regular dungeons and not letting you do it unless you're in a particular event for one of them. But that's a good way of reducing that time commitment and freeing up some player time to focus on other types of content that you're doing. Regarding game versus metagame, I think there's two options. The first one is really try to beef up the game aspect of it. Give players more to do inside of combat itself. Develop mechanics that require some genuine skill to be exercised inside of dungeons. So that there's more to do than just what the auto battle does, which is pick your best skill that's done cooling down and use it as soon as you possibly can. One example of this that I think hasn't gone as well as it could have is Hydra. I think Hydra was well crafted that auto battle doesn't do well on it because you have these moment by moment decisions to make of what's a good skill to use right now and who's a good target for it. That's really contingent on the current realities of the battle. The Hydra that's in the middle of devouring one of your friends is the one you need to target. But sometimes if it's the head of Wrath or the head of Mischief, targeting it might be difficult unless you use a certain mechanic. Certainly that does create more engaging combat. You need to actually think about the skills that you're using. Honestly, surprisingly, I don't find it very fun. And I think a lot of players don't enjoy it. I think that's in part because auto battle has trained us that you should never actually be using the manual in a battle, and the game really incentivizes you to use auto battle, and so it felt awkward to have a battle that I had to do on manual. I think ultimately not just building boss mechanics that require this. I think this requires you to rethink some of the champion mechanics. Right now, cooldowns are really low on all of your champions, and so there's really, since your skills are powerful, the best thing to do is just use them as soon as they're done. They'll be back in just a couple turns anyway. Why save them? I think things would be getting a little more interesting if you had really long cooldowns, where it was a 20 turn cooldown. You're going to use this once across the entire fight, but it's a really powerful skill. What's the right time for it? Honestly, though, I don't see how this can be productively done in the current game. I think if you did mechanics like that, really long cooldowns or just a significant change in the decisions to be made inside the battle, it's really a completely different game than it is right now. I don't think you can just do that by adding a few champions with some unique mechanics. I think you have to sort of retrofit all the champions that exist today, which there's 1,000 of them. It would be completely remaking the game. So while I think there are a couple steps you could take in this direction to make the game aspect a little bit more entertaining, I think that's actually going to be very difficult and very expensive for Plarium to do. And so there's another option, which is just embrace the fact that the metagame is better than the game here. And so what you would do there is instead focus on building content that lets you spend more time in the metagame and less time in the game. So content where you're building and rebuilding your team frequently, but then not running that same team 1,000 times against the same dungeon, but instead running them once, having a dungeon where you get a reward for completing it once. You don't have to grind it every day for the rest of your career in Raid. But you complete it once, you get a reward, and then maybe that content goes away. I think temporary content is a really good way that you can do this, of something where it's up for a week, you can get some points if you complete it, and then it goes away and turns into something new. If you want to hear more about a specific idea for this, I have an idea I called Tower Tournaments. That was episode 1. Let's see, this way. Up here, I'm going to put a link for it, and you can watch that next if you want to. That's a specific way that you could have players spending more time in the metagame and less time in the game, and really enjoying some of the content that they're experiencing there. Regarding content variability, I think you need to have ways of building content that is configurable or randomized in some way. So instead of your content looking the same every single time that you play it, can you have content that changes and changes in ways that players find themselves needing to rebuild the team on a fairly regular basis to take on the new challenge? That gives them a reason to engage with the metagame regularly, and it becomes a way that Plarium can take care of this content treadmill problem, where if there's a random element to it that makes the dungeon continuously challenging, but without Plarium having to design a new dungeon every couple of weeks or every day, then it becomes content that has a really long shelf life, where you design it once, but there's enough of an element of randomization to it that it stays engaging for a long period of time. Again, I have an episode that focused on this. Link is right up there. It's called Cursed Dungeons. And it's a way to take those existing equipment dungeons and both reduce the amount of time that you spend on them overall, but make more of that time be spent trying out new teams and taking on new challenges instead of just, doing your 10, 20, 30 runs every day on auto battle and not paying attention to them. I mentioned randomized a lot here. Also, configurable is a thing that you can do. Like I said, there's a lot of things in your dungeons that are very static. The affinity they are, what champions are in the waves, things like that. And a lot of those could be fairly cheaply shifted around. So, for instance, you could put different champions in the waves. You could throw some different passive skills on your bosses or things like that. The tower tournament idea has some of these ideas. But what you want to do is get to a place where instead of it taking you 6 months to design a completely new dungeon that requires players to build a completely new type of team, you can have like an intern create 10 new variants of a dungeon in 1 hour just by sort of taking the pieces that you have and putting them together in different ways. You sort of want to view a lot of the content you have already as Lego bricks, where instead of there only being one way to use, the ice golem in your content, can you sort of put these pieces together, stack them up in different ways with config work so that you can really quickly release new configurations of the Lego bricks that give you completely different kinds of challenges, but that don't require your artists and modelers and programmers to be constantly developing completely new mechanics. It's just taking things that you've already built and putting them together and deploying them in new ways. And so I think that creates a way for Plarium to create a lot of content with a small amount of effort, and really keep players engaged over a longer period of time. The overall thrust of all of these ideas is, you want to reduce the amount of time in Raid that is spent on unsupervised grinding, where you just turn on multi-battle and walk away and let your old team that you built 3 months ago just do its work, and replace it with more time spent in the metagame. You want players actually really engaging with the content, looking daily and seeing, what are today's challenges? Do I have champions that could take that on? Do I want to try to build a team for them and get some bigger rewards from it? That becomes something where your players are much more engaged. They're not just running their dailies and saving up energy in case there's ever a point where there's a monthly fusion that they're interested in. But they're really playing on a regular basis because there's some intrinsic reward for them every time. There's both the extrinsic reward of loot that they're getting, but the intrinsic reward of it's fun to be able to build a team that can beat the content. You feel good the first time you clear Ultra Nightmare Clan boss. You want to create more of these milestones that players can achieve that they feel good about, instead of just forcing them to grind the same thing over and over. So that's it for me today. Again, you can watch the rest of the videos in this series. I would love it if drop me a comment below. Let me know if you like any of these ideas, if you agree with these. If you have your own ideas that you'd like me to explore in a future episode, I'd be happy to do that. Of course, if you're so inclined, would love it if you would subscribe, and you can find out when I've released more videos in this series. That's it for me today. JG out.